Tell me a little bit about what is the Cities Tour on CSPAN.
The CSPAN Cities Tour is our initiative to get outside of Washington, D.C., where we're based. We're a team of videographers who travel the country. We embed ourselves in a city for a week at a time, and we work with our cable partners, such as Midco here in Pierre, to produce programming that highlights that city's history and literary scene for our Book TV on CSPAN 2 and our American History TV on CSPAN 3.
The Cities Tour has been all over the United States. Tell me about some of your previous stops before Pierre.
Well, you know that old country song, I've Been Everywhere, man? We could say that about the Cities Tour. So we have been all over the country. We have an East Coast team and a West Coast team, and it's an ongoing project. So we've been everywhere from out on the West Coast in San Diego, we've been to Las Vegas, and then we've been recently to places like Portland, Maine, which was such a joy. It's one of my favorite cities. We're heading to Burlington, Vermont next. And so you really get this varied look at what makes America interesting in the area of history and America's literary scene.
This is your first stop in South Dakota, however. Tell me about that.
This is our first stop in South Dakota, and for a lot of the members of our team, it's our first time in South Dakota at all, so we're getting to check another state off of our list. And we're starting our trip in South Dakota right here in Pierre. So we're working with a lot of different people like the state capitol. We interviewed the governor earlier today, and we're also working with the South Dakota Historic Society to kind of feature what makes Pierre so interesting as far as history and your literary scene.
You've picked up a little bit of the local culture. I know we've told you about Zesto, we've told you about great places to eat. Anything jumping out at you here?
You know, one of my favorite things about this job, and I'm biased, I do think it's the best job maybe in the country, is I love going out and just speaking with people and learning about the area and learning about these towns that otherwise I might not have visited. Let's be honest, people might not think of Pierre off the top of their heads whenever they come to South Dakota. They might think about the Black Hills, they might think about the Badlands, but being here in Pierre, I've loved seeing that landscape. I mean, in the East Coast where I'm based out of, you know, there are buildings dotting every little bit of land. And here you get these big, beautiful vistas where you're just seeing these rolling hillsides. And there's something so lovely and peaceful about that. And so we're getting to take that in. We've eaten our fill. I'm going to head to Zesto's later and get myself a soft serve cone. And we're just beginning. We only got here on Saturday, and we're going to be here through Thursday evening before we move on to Sioux Falls.
So, as you just mentioned, you're not here just overnight. You didn't just fly in. You're spending time here.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the great things about the CSPAN Cities Tour is that we do really get to ingrain ourselves in the culture of a community, and I think that comes through in our programming. So of course we're doing stories about the area's history and literary scene, but we're also shooting B-roll of the city, and we're interviewing the mayor, and we're interviewing the governor here in Pierre to try to get a sense of the city as it is today as well. And so the more we get out and the more we get to experience your community and talk to people who live here, I think that comes through just tenfold in our programming to kind of show maybe what's important to the people of Pierre, because we've had those dialogues. We've got to find out how the city wants to be represented. And it's a pleasure to get to do so.
Now, you spent all your time in Pierre and Fort Pierre. Did you get out and see any other parts of the state?
You know, we were lucky enough to have a little bit of time to head to the Badlands, which I had never been to and has always been on my list. I'm a big national park junkie, and I love hiking and nature. And boy, it was breathtaking. I'm not really sure that there's words to describe what it's like seeing that for the first time, except that it felt like another planet almost. It's like you stepped off of Earth and you could have been on Mars almost. I mean, we did some hiking, we stopped at all of the overlooks, and I love those moments where you get to feel small in nature. You know, no matter what's going on with you, you're in this big, beautiful, untouched natural landscape, and you just feel small in a really comforting way. So we got to do that, and then while looking at that landscape, we saw bighorn sheep, which I've always wanted to see. As we were leaving the park, we saw a single bison out in the distance, and I mean, you couldn't have scripted it any better. It was an experience I'll remember the rest of my life.
So this will air as part of your Cities Tour on C-SPAN. Tell me a little bit in broad strokes about the mission of C-SPAN and why C-SPAN is important. You've been around since 1976?
Right. Well, actually, so C-SPAN was founded in 1979. Our founder, Brian Lamb, wanted to start it up with a mission of providing viewers with direct access to their lawmakers. And so we have a lot of different programming. We've expanded since then to include C-SPAN 2 and C-SPAN 3. Those house our Book TV and American History TV for 48 hours every weekend. But of course, that coverage of politics and government remains our bread and butter. And if you think about it, it was a radical idea to provide that direct access when it was founded in the 70s, and it continues to be so today. I think it's really interesting that you get to watch the legislative process, and it's a great checks and balances nuances as well. You get to see how your lawmakers are representing you as a constituent. And so C-SPAN, of course, we do that programming, and then we've expanded a little bit, but we do feature nonfiction books and American history, which kind of all goes in with our mission. And while you're seeing all of this programming, there are a few things that you're not going to see. So number one is you're not going to see editorializing of any kind. Even in our programming like we do for the Cities Tour, we're not on there telling you what we think. We're letting the people who know the story best tell that story. We're letting authors talk about their own books. We're letting the mayor talk about his own city. We're learning about the history from the people who know it best, and I think that's really important. You're not going to see commercials, and you're also not going to see use of government or taxpayer money. A lot of people don't know that C-SPAN is a nonprofit network, and we are funded by the cable industry. So when I say we're working with our cable partners, such as Midco here in Pierre, we truly couldn't do what we do without them. They offer us as a public service. They cannot have any editorial input on what we show, but they do fund us, and we're able to provide the programming that we provide because of folks like Midco.
I think that's an important distinction, is that there's no public dollars going for this, but it's something we take for granted, that we can tune in and watch legislative coverage in D.C. We can actually be in D.C. even though we may have never traveled there or visited.
Absolutely. I think a few people at work, we joke that it's the best reality television out there. Reality television is pretty popular, but if you can tune in and watch what's going on in the U.S. Capitol, I mean, there are interesting things going on there all the time. I think people mistake it for being dry, and we understand sometimes you're not going to want to sit down and watch a 5-hour Senate hearing, but there are those pieces in there that affect you, affect the country, and you're getting to hear it straight from the mouths of the people who are making the decisions, which is important.
So the C-SPAN Cities Tour is going to air Midco Channel 20 for our viewers here in Pierre and Fort Pierre, coming up on October 7th and 8th. What do you think? Are you going to educate some people in Pierre and Fort Pierre? Are they going to be surprised with what they see?
Yeah, I think there's a duality to that. So of course we want to show the rest of the country what makes a city like Pierre so interesting. And what I love about the Cities Tour is, yes, I mentioned we've been to bigger cities like Las Vegas, like San Diego, but we do a lot of small to mid-sized cities, such as Pierre. And so maybe cities that if you're, in Portland, Maine, you might have never heard of Pierre, South Dakota. And so we're showing the rest of the country what makes a place like Pierre interesting. We're showing its place in American history. I mean, who hasn't heard of Lewis and Clark? But did you know that Lewis and Clark traveled here through Pierre? There's that tie. And so I think that's a great thing we do. But another thing that we do is hopefully we'll introduce some of the folks to Pierre, something that they might not know about their own town. Maybe a new appreciation. So I always give the example that I live in Washington, D.C., and it's easy to get a little bit jaded, and you see the Washington Monument every day, and although it's still lovely, you just take it for granted. But then whenever I have friends or family come visit, they will just be wowed by it. They will be, I can't believe the Washington Monument's right here. And you get that new perspective on where you're from through other people's eyes. So I think it's interesting what we do. Maybe some folks will be more excited to learn more about their history by hearing what we have to say and how we're showcasing it.
Ashley, thank you for making the effort and traveling to Pierre and seeing us with those eyes.
Thank you. And just for anybody who does happen to miss our programming, I'd like to add that there's going to be a special landing page for Pierre on our C-SPAN Cities Tour website, cspan.org.